Do you know what Inter-A is?
I think I have a basic understanding of what Inter-A is.
I think I have some sort of idea of what it is.
Sort of. Like, I know it's a program. I know it's done by acceptance, but I can't really, define what Inter-A is in, one sentence, you know?
Honestly, I don't even know. Do you know what Inter-A is?
No.
I think it's like this special program where advanced students.
I think it's where all the smart people come together, and I don't know. It's just like the higher upper class people.
It's not like usual school.
It's like a place where all smart people go at KP, right? At KP, right?
Choice programs. They're different from typical high school clubs and after-school activities. Unlike those things, choice programs focus on an entire aspect of a student's education, whether that be reflecting on a student's intellect, focusing on a language like French, or even studying a different area of art. These types of programs are pretty niche and aren't really known to the mainstream public. With that said, let's focus in on a specific program, Inter-A. Now you still might be wondering, what is an Inter-A and what's so special about it?
So from my previous experience and knowledge, Inter-A is a leadership program.
Focused around group work, self-paced work, and is really student-focused.
It involves some teachers who are dedicated to the program and some students who take all their courses exclusively in the program.
It basically brings in talented and young individuals with leadership potential all together into this small kind of mini school, essentially built within a larger school.
High school, basically.
The Inter-A program resided at Kwantlen Park Secondary in the B Wing and took up 3 open classrooms and 1 portable. Not only did Inter-A live at Kwantlen Park, but another choice program by the name of French Immersion. The key differences between these 2 programs were that French Immersion did not have their own classrooms, but instead integrated with the KP students in their learning. This caused French Immersion to have a closer bond with the KP students, unlike the Inter-A program. The 3 groups had no issues with each other at Kwantlen Park and lived peacefully. I mean, that was until the school became overpopulated. In May of 2016, Kwantlen Park Secondary had an overpopulation of students. Originally, the school was built with 1,200 students, but at the time, the population was well over 1,536 students. That's more than 336 than originally intended. To deal with this issue, the school district had to come up with some ideas, and those were add a school extension, build another class portable, build a new school, change the school borders, move French Immersion, and finally move Inter-A. All of these options were told to the public, but moving Inter-A was pushed to the forefront of how to deal with this issue. With that said, how did Inter-A think about this?
Initially hearing that the Inter-A program was one of the options to confront the move to accommodate the overpopulation of Kwantlen Park was definitely scary at first.
I was definitely anxious about it. Moving was not the solution that I wished to see.
I definitely thought that it was a poor choice to make because we were only about 180 students plus staff, which was 187 bodies total, and the amount of space that they needed didn't really equal the amount of students they were moving. So it seemed kind of like an ill-informed choice because it just simply didn't foster enough space or materials for what they wanted. and it just didn't generally make sense to me.
The first word that came to mind was heartbroken, but I feel like that's a little bit overdramatic, but I definitely was scared of the change that was to come. I really enjoyed what KP had to offer me. Also being like on the sports team there, like I was thinking about that because my next year would have been like my golden year for sports, right? And now all of a sudden my team's being broken up and I have nothing to do about it when we've been preparing for this for like the last couple of years.
I'll admit to myself, I never thought in a million years that the Inter-Ray program would be moved. From what I had heard, the Inter-Ray program had been there for a very, very long time, and the Kuala Park student body had grown very accustomed to the Inter-Ray program. So at the very beginning, I just shrugged it off and never really thought that the consideration would go any further than what we already heard.
At the time, I honestly didn't think that it would be that big of a deal or that it was a real potential threat. I didn't think that I had a very optimistic look on the school district, on the school board trustees, on basically local municipal government in general. And I thought like, oh, we're a group of students who is so connected to the local community here. And we have been at Kuala Park Secondary since its founding. So I thought that we were like an integral part of the school that could never really be removed from it. So it was honestly like, I didn't regard it as much of a threat until later on, when the process of moving really got started, and then we started to have more district meetings and we started to have like different surveys being conducted, and then that was when it became more real for me.
In October, a meeting was held in the gym to tell parents and students about some of the options. Afterwards, a couple of more meetings were held at the school district itself, and from there, Inter-Ray realized that the district was honing in on what their decision would be. Knowing the student body of Inter-A had their chances stacked against them, they had one of two choices: lay down and accept that they might have to move, or stand their ground and prove to the school district that moving them would be a bad idea. The students chose the latter. When the program decided to fight, the school district announced that they'd be making their decision on the overpopulation on November 17th. When they announced this, a Facebook group that was called November 17th Board Meeting Discussion was created. From this creation, a number of students, parents, and alumni that wanted to help joined. Through this page, there was a number of discussions of how to present their case, how to stop the school district from moving them, and other ways that could help them on their journey. Some of the ideas that bounced off this group varied, from signing petitions to trying to get the news involved to get some traction from the public. All of these ideas were funneled through the group until one of the members got the district to allow some Inter-A representatives to speak and propose a case on why they shouldn't be moved. From there, the group came up with a case and strategy to talk about in the meeting. Some of the big points that they wanted to bring up were that removing Inter-A wouldn't actually decrease the number of occupants in the building, seeing that the program is made up of 180 students. Instead, the district should be looking at changing the school borders for the neighborhoods that are outside to be fed to the schools that are closer to them, those being Queen Elizabeth and LA Madison, and finally proposing the idea of moving the decision to December to take in consideration of putting students above all else. Once the plan was set, the program had to find their representatives. To determine that, the program chose one representative from each grade. Then they voted on Facebook to see on who would be their final presenters. The outcomes saw 3 women, Charlene Chan in grade 9, Shia Ursa in grade 10, and finally Cindy Zhang in grade 11.
Being chosen as one of the delegates to be able to represent the program and speak at the district level was really humbling, and it was I recognized the responsibility and the faith that my peers had in me, and I was really, really honored and really grateful for that.
I couldn't believe that people wanted me to speak, partially because I didn't feel like I had enough leadership skills or enough public speaking skills to actually demonstrate what was necessary to the school board.
I definitely felt pretty honored to have done it. When the teachers say that they trusted me and my skills to represent on behalf of Inter-A, it definitely was kind of like a good push in my public speaking journey, I guess, because in grade 8, like, I was really bad at public speaking.
When the seniors had voted on it, it made me feel a lot more nervous because this was real. This wasn't something I could kid around anymore when we were making jokes. Like, I was actually having to confront the reality of this decision that a lot of other classmates of mine didn't necessarily have to see.
Yeah, I definitely felt a little bit of pressure coming into it. I needed to make sure that I was on point the whole time, that everything was perfect, and that I did my best to give Inter the best shot at staying at KP.
I recognized that I was in in a kind of unique situation along with my fellow delegates in that we were all students. So our voices were a little bit different than the others that the school board trustees were exposed to, and perhaps we had a little bit more weight in the fact that we were student delegates, and this is really something that we are really passionate about and we care a lot about. It's our family essentially, and we had perhaps like a more youthful, maybe a more optimistic outlook, and that was kind of like the points that we were trying to score to try to get them to sway their decision in our favor.
After they finalized their plans and chose their presenters, the program was ready for November 17th.
What can you recall from the meeting that night?
I remember being in the car driving over to the, what is it, like the education board place? Yeah. I don't know what it's called. Just being nervous out of my mind, right? Like there's a lot of pressure going on here, a lot of like big people, I guess. And I saw that on the agenda, they were also making a decision about moving, I think, the French immersion program at Tweedsmuir. And so all of us kind of had common ground. We started talking together, whatever.
I remember tuning out a lot during the meeting, and I wasn't quite present as I should have been, especially as someone in front of a bunch of school board employees. And my mother, I remember, she was very furious when the first person spoke. And I don't remember a lot of it, but he did say something along the lines of, "I am only here to entertain the delegates." And although I didn't express any change or any difference to it, the other two speakers, Cindy and looked visibly very frustrated already. Essentially, if I were to dissect what that meant, is that he was only here to listen to what we had to say and not input that into any of the choices they were going to make.
There were just things that led up to that moment that suggested to me that things weren't being laid on the table in a way that the choices were equal. And there were a lot of trustees, I think, who had already made up their mind and had already decided what was best for the program or for the school district. So if the trustees have already decided what's best for the program and for the school district, I think there was a limited opportunity for the students to change their mind. I think some of the students may have understood this. Other students felt, I think, that if they made just the right case, if they were able to tell the trustees really what was at stake, that they could sway their decision. And so they went into it sort of with an open heart and sort of like with a real sense of hope, and that the trustees are going to listen, and if they just knew what this would cost and what it would do, they would really reconsider and go in a different direction in terms of moving it. So a lot of students had that at their heart.
That night, 95% of the room was filled with Inter students, parents, and staff. Mostly everyone in that room knew what was about to happen and knew that they were walking into a losing fight. However, the program still wanted to go ahead and still fight for their right. So, the three women stood there and gave their presentation. Afterwards, the school board rejected the offer of moving their decision to December and made their decision right there and then. It was a unanimous vote. The Inter program would be moved to Queen Elizabeth Secondary as of 2017.
It was a huge, like...
No, everyone was mad.
Emotional
they were
mess,
angry.
yeah.
Like, it wasn't... Okay, no, actually, it wasn't anger. It was more just, like, defeat.
Yeah.
Right? Because I remember the second it happened, almost more than half of the people sitting in those seats, they just got up and they left. Like, they just left.
And the school board just kept going with their meeting like it was nothing. But I remember seeing the doors to the school board, they were glass doors. So when we left, we started crying in the
Yeah.
literally like right behind the doors.
Yeah,
And
they
we knew
could
that
see. Yeah,
us.
they could see us.
And it wasn't for show though. It wasn't to make them feel bad that they were moving us. It was just the fact that we were so upset.
Yeah.
So hurt and so defeated by I don't know, everything that was happening. That despite all of our efforts, despite all of our discussions and debates, it still just wasn't enough.
Yeah, I remember like especially out of the 4 people who we chose, I think the only one who was still able to stay strong, and she kept asking questions about like how about the move was Cindy.
It seemed quite undemocratic to me in the sense that they had a public survey going on for a while where they asked the local community, parents, students, anybody who was going to be affected by the move of the program to sort of submit their opinions and to let the district know how they felt about the move, about each of the possible options for them to test the feasibility of each. And I know that Inter had a very high response rate because we reached out to alumni, we reached out to parents, to students. A lot of my peers submitted responses. A lot of my peers' siblings who had gone through the program submitted responses. A lot of our parents did. And it was all vastly opposed to the move because, again, we were with Kwantlen Park Secondary since the school was built, and we had built up connections with that community. And it seemed unfair to us to just cut them off just because the school was overpopulated and that was outside of our control. So they took that survey, the results, and they actually announced at that district meeting that night that the public was against the move of Inter. And even though they said that they would take our voices into consideration, in the end, it wasn't enough to outweigh the rules that they had to implement. So in a sense, they were operating in a fashion where, to me, it seemed like they were looking for voices from the people and to look for their opinions, whereas there was a lot of closed room discussions already going on, and we went into that November meeting already with a decision being made. And that night, the student delegation was presenting, and at the end, when I was reflecting on it later on, I realized that they had a decision in mind before they even heard us out as students. Even after they reviewed all of our opinions from the surveys, even after they had seen all the statistics about how people didn't want to move, they asked the public questions. They didn't take that into consideration like they promised they would. And to me as a student, and even to me now as a graduate from the program, it just seems very undemocratic, and I was honestly really disappointed in the school board.
So what was the day after like?
I remember coming into the school. It was very early that day. One of the first ones there, and thinking like, oh, like this is not. We're not going to be here next year.
The day after was, well, it was different for everyone, right? Some people had already known that some people had already known that the decision was made. Some people were curiously awaiting. Some people had just completely been in the dark, and they didn't even know why this herd was happening.
So the day after the decision, I remember more clearly because it was a regular school day and we had a regular schedule in place. But what the teachers did, and I really appreciated, is they sort of gave us a debriefing session. So in the morning, we all gathered into the big room in our herd formation. So everybody in the program, all 200 of us, we just sort of sat in shocked silence for a while.
So everybody kind of came to that herd with an expectation that we were going to hear the sad news. And for me, I think I didn't cry that day because I had cried so much the day before, that for me it was no longer like an upset feeling. It was like an angry feeling. It was like bruh, like.
Yeah, no, I get that too. Like, I actually don't remember crying that much. I definitely cried a little, but like same for me. Like that sadness just turned into like bitterness and like anger. I was just like, why? I can't believe, especially the fact that we were going back to the place the very next day that we knew we would have to leave.
And then I remember hurting And I remember Mr. Blemon kind of taking the lead and talking to everyone in the herd itself.
I made a speech. I remember wanting to talk in a way that encouraged students. I wanted to help them make sense of the events. I wanted them to feel empowered. They had tried really hard, and some of them put their heart and their soul into their presentation. And I didn't want students to walk away feeling that that was what life had in store for them, that, you know, that they could be beat down by forces outside, because students in that room are going to go on to change the world. They're certainly changing their own worlds, and they're making the world a better place. And so it's important, I thought at the time, to give context, to give a sense of hope, and also give a sense of how do we react to things that are beyond our control. How do we sort of achieve a serene kind of acceptance? This is beyond my control. It is unfortunate, but I can live with it. I can face it. Because frankly, it probably won't be the worst moment those students experience. Life will hand them difficult things, disappointments. It'll hand them real setbacks, physical, emotional, spiritual setbacks. And I wanted to hand them a set of tools that sort of said, hey, that is a setback, but it's not going to define you. It doesn't have to stop you. In fact, it's a stepping stone. It's one more growth. It's polishing the gem that will be you. It's not crushing your spirits. Oh no, you can rise again. You can learn from it. It could ennoble your spirit.
For the remainder of the year, the program packed and had to transition to Queen Elizabeth Secondary. A few students even toured the school to see what type of environment it would be.
I had never been in the school. First off, that was my first time within Queen Elizabeth Secondary. My first thought was that this is a maze. Like, every single floor looked exactly the same. It was huge. And very, very different from Kwantlen Park. It was very difficult for me to kind of situate in my mind Inter in that space, because they hadn't done any renovations for the rooms yet. They put us up on like one of the higher levels. I think it was the second floor, and they toured us around there.
I just was really focused on like the infrastructure of the school, and it was like, oh, you know, it looks a little bit crammed, a little like, like low ceilings. That's a really like the biggest thing that I picked up on, because KP had crazy high ceilings, so everything was just looked really short and really compact, like a Polly Pocket house. But yeah, nothing really stood out to me. Just the actual physical school itself.
Everybody we met that was in like a classroom that was part of like the school staff was very welcoming. They were very inquisitive about the program. They asked us a lot of questions. Told us that if we needed anything that they'd be there for us. They were really supportive.
Like, the students that were touring us seemed friendly, like the student council students that were chosen for the job. But there was a teacher that was a bit salty about it. We walked into his classroom. He's like, oh, come in, this is going to be one of the classrooms that you'll have next year as Inter students. And he's like, I've been in this classroom for 12 years. Kind of sad that I have to move now. Just kind of going off on a tangent about how he was connected to this classroom. He was going to be very upset that he wouldn't be able to teach in that space anymore. And we're just kind of standing there in front of his class. Yes, he was teaching a class and he interrupted it to go off on this tangent. And we're all standing there, about like 15, 20 students. And we're just kind of there. Listening, and we didn't have anything to say. And in that moment, I was just kind of like, there are a few teachers here that are not welcoming, and there's definitely a few people that aren't ready for this move, which felt kind of confusing to me, because it's not like Inter wanted the move. It wasn't like our choice, and we weren't invading Queen Elizabeth. So I felt it was immature on that teacher's part.
Now, you might be wondering on how Kwantlen Park changed after Inter left. Well, asking some KP students that were going there at the time on how they felt about the move and how it affected Kwantlen Park, the answers were,
do you remember about the overpopulation problem? Did it affect you in any way?
No, it did not.
I heard about it, but it didn't affect me in any way. I just heard that they're moving to another school because we had too many students in here, or in Kwantlen Park, so.
thinking about the change?
Not really.
No.
Yeah. Although it makes sense that something like this didn't affect them in the long haul, it does, however, still impact the Inter-A program to this day.
I think more so the outer image of Inter-A just has kind of vanished completely. People who were in Inter-A when they were in Kwantlen Park, although outsider schools may not be as familiar with it, there was still some vague semblance of knowledge, whereas the move to QE was very low-key, and a lot of us didn't really see how much impact our image at Kwantlen Park was compared to that of QE.
I think the move has affected the legacy of the program a little bit and the reputation. I hope it has. I hope it shows that the program is resilient, and I hope that this shows that the program is sustainable. However, I do hope that our concerns and sort of the challenges that we face will also be remembered, so that we aren't moved again in the near future.
I don't think that we will be moved anytime soon again, but it was just a fear I had in that moment and throughout the entire process.
I think a lot of our roots, our community connections, were severed in the move. We're in a different community and in a different environment, and we're sending out new roots, but we're not as connected as we used to be. There's been some strength we've discovered. There have been some opportunities that have opened up, but there's been some losses.
Okay, people always say, I've always heard so many things from alumni saying, oh, after this year, Inter-A is going to go to crap, or after this year, I think Inter-A has just gotten worse and worse and worse. But I don't know, I don't necessarily think that's true. I think that Inter-A is self-sufficient, and I think that, yeah, people are changing, but there's always going to be at least a few good students. And I think that, you know, the teachers, they have a lot of experience under their belts. And I think
I think that the Inter-A program's reputation has become bolstered in a way that sort of advertises the Inter-A program to be that much stronger of a student body and that much stronger of a place that raises strong and independent leaders. And I think that the Inter-A legacy will continue to be that of one. I think that the Inter-A program and its legacy will continue to be that of a program that is strong and that is mature and graceful. And I think that the Inter-A program will continue to be remembered as a program that wherever they are can stand strong through their leaders, through their staff and teachers, and through the family environment and network that spreads through the students and even to us alumni and even to future students. So I think that the Inter-A legacy will continue to be positive, and I think that this move has allowed the Inter-A program to have a much stronger district-wide name and reputation, and I think that overall this move has affected the reputation and legacy of the Inter-A program positively.
When I was an Inter-A student and I saw this happen, I was originally very angry. But looking back on this story, I realized there was a moral. The moral being that the school district are also just human and had to make a difficult decision. No matter what that decision would have been, it would have inevitably hurt people. Moving French immersion, changing the school borders. Someone's life would have changed no matter what way you look at it. And it just so happens that the Inter-A program got the end of it. And it sucks. But what can you do? The program continues to live on peacefully at Queen Elizabeth Secondary. And although the people who were involved are now gone, the history of this event will live on. And if I'm being honest, I'm just glad I was there to see it.